Hello everyone, my name is Emily Carter, and I am 29 years old. What you are about to hear is not just my story. It is a journey through pain, loss, and a truth I never thought I would uncover. If you are watching this, take a moment and tell me in the comments which country you are listening from. I would really love to know where my story is reaching across the world. And if this story moves you even a little, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional true-life documentary stories like this one. Because what happened to me started on the darkest night of my life. The night I went into labor and lost everything at once. It was meant to be a life-changing night in the happiest way possible. But instead, it turned into the beginning of a tragedy I would never fully recover from. I was in the final moments of my pregnancy, already feeling the intense pressure and pain of labor, when my husband Daniel rushed me to the hospital. His hand was tightly holding mine in the car, and even through the pain, I remember feeling safe, because he was with me. He kept telling me to breathe, that everything would be fine, that we were about to meet our baby. I believed him completely because Daniel had always been my strength, the calm in every storm. But life doesn't always wait for perfect moments to destroy everything. As we approached the hospital, the streets were unusually quiet. I remember the sound of the wind outside the car window and the faint glow of streetlights passing by like blurred stars. I was focused only on getting to the next contraction, holding on to Daniel's voice as my anchor. Then, everything changed in a matter of seconds. A loud crash shattered the silence of the night. A truck coming from the opposite direction ran a red light and slammed directly into our car. The impact was violent, sudden, and unforgettable. The world spun. Glass shattered everywhere. My body jerked forward and then backward, and I remember losing my breath as pain mixed with fear in a way I had never experienced before. Disclaimer: this is a fictional story created for entertainment and educational purposes only. Any resemblance to real persons, events, or situations is purely coincidental. Daniel shouted my name. It was the last thing I heard clearly from him. His voice was filled with shock and urgency, but also something I had never heard before: fear. The car had stopped, twisted at an angle, smoke rising from the front. I was barely conscious, trapped in pain from both the accident and the labor that had already begun. I tried to turn toward him, but everything was blurry. My ears were ringing and my body felt like it didn't belong to me anymore. I called out for Daniel, again and again, but my voice was weak and broken. People started gathering around. I could see shadows moving outside the shattered windows, voices shouting for help, sirens beginning to echo in the distance. I don't know how much time passed, but it felt like both seconds and hours at the same time. Then suddenly, I saw emergency responders pulling people out. They were shouting instructions, trying to open doors, cutting through metal. I kept searching for Daniel through the chaos, refusing to believe anything bad had happened to him. I thought maybe he was just injured. Maybe he would be taken to another ambulance. Maybe we would still arrive at the hospital together. But then I saw it. A moment that froze my entire existence. Daniel was being pulled from the driver's side. But something was wrong. The way they moved, the urgency, the silence between their actions. It didn't feel like they were saving someone who was okay. I remember trying to scream, but no sound came out. My body was still in labor, every contraction now mixed with emotional shock that made everything worse. I felt like I was being torn apart from the inside and outside at the same time. I was placed into an ambulance, but I couldn't stop looking for him. I kept asking if Daniel was okay, but no one answered me directly. They kept telling me to stay calm, to breathe, to focus on the baby. But how could I focus when my entire world was collapsing? The ride to the hospital felt unreal. The sirens were loud, but my mind was louder. I kept replaying the crash over and over, trying to understand how something so normal could turn into something so irreversible in seconds. When we finally arrived at the hospital, everything became chaotic. Nurses rushed me inside, asking questions I couldn't fully process. My body was going into full labor now, and the pain was overwhelming, but my mind was somewhere else. I kept asking about Daniel. I kept begging someone to tell me what was happening. But every time I asked, the answers became more unclear, more distant. It felt like people were avoiding the truth. I remember being placed on a hospital bed, bright lights above me, voices surrounding me, machines beeping rapidly. I was sweating, shaking, and crying all at once. I could hear doctors saying the baby was coming soon, but I couldn't feel any happiness. There was only fear, confusion, and a deep, sinking emptiness growing inside me. At some point, I heard someone say there had been an accident on the way. I don't know if I fully understood what they meant at that moment, but something inside me already knew that my life had changed forever in a way I could never undo. When I opened my eyes after giving birth, everything felt different, as if the world I knew no longer existed. My body was exhausted beyond anything I had ever experienced, heavy and weak, as though I had been pulled through fire and left there to recover alone. The first thing I instinctively did was look for Daniel. In my mind, he would be there sitting beside me, holding our baby, smiling through tears like we had always imagined. But the chair next to my bed was empty. The room felt too quiet, too cold, and too distant. I tried to sit up, but pain shot through my body, and that's when I realized something was wrong. Not just physically, but deeply, emotionally wrong. A nurse came in shortly after, adjusting the machines around me and checking my vitals. I asked her about my husband immediately. My voice was weak, almost broken. But the question came out with urgency I couldn't control. She paused for a moment, exchanging a glance with another nurse, before telling me to rest. She didn't answer directly. That silence said more than words ever could. My heart began to race as I asked again. Louder this time, demanding to know where Daniel was. But instead of answers, I was met with avoidance and gentle instructions to calm down because I had just gone through a difficult delivery. Hours passed, though I barely felt time anymore. I finally saw my baby for the first time when a nurse placed him in my arms. He was so small, so fragile, wrapped in a soft hospital blanket. I remember staring at him without fully understanding what I was feeling. He was beautiful, innocent, completely unaware of the storm his arrival had come with. I named him Noah in my mind before I even spoke it out loud, because something about him felt like survival itself, like he was the only reason I was still breathing through the pain. But even holding him couldn't fully pull me away from the emptiness growing inside me. Daniel should have been there for this moment. He should have been the first to see our son, to cry, to laugh, to hold us both. Later that day, I was told I would need to stay in recovery for observation. I kept asking for updates about Daniel, but the responses became shorter each time. "He is being taken care of," they said. "He is not here right now. You need to rest." None of it made sense. No one clearly said what had happened. I started to feel a strange panic building inside me, like I was standing at the edge of something terrible without being allowed to see it fully. By the second day, I was discharged from the maternity ward, but something inside me still felt like I hadn't fully woken up from a nightmare. I expected Daniel to be waiting outside, maybe injured, maybe recovering somewhere else in the hospital, but still alive, still present. Instead, I was taken to a waiting area where a nurse quietly explained that I would need to arrange my own transportation home. That was the moment confusion turned into fear. I asked again where my husband was, and this time, the answer came more carefully, more heavily. There had been an accident on the way to the hospital, and he had not survived. The words didn't immediately register. It felt like my mind refused to accept them, as if the sentence was spoken in a language I couldn't fully understand. I remember staring at the nurse's face, waiting for her to correct herself, waiting for someone to tell me it was a mistake. But no correction came. Instead, there was silence, the kind that confirms something final. My body went numb. I couldn't cry at first. I couldn't move. It felt like the air had been taken out of the room, leaving only emptiness where everything used to be. I was given my belongings, a few simple items placed in a small bag. Everything else we had shared, everything from our life together, seemed to have disappeared in an instant. I walked out of the hospital holding my newborn son in my arms, feeling like I was stepping into a world that no longer recognized me. Every sound outside felt distant. Every face I passed felt unfamiliar. People were moving, living, speaking. But I was frozen in a reality that had already ended for me. When I reached what used to be our home, I noticed immediately that something was wrong. The lights were off. The atmosphere felt empty, abandoned. I struggled to open the door, my hands still weak, my body still recovering. But when I finally stepped inside, I saw that many of Daniel's belongings were gone. His clothes, his work items, even personal things that meant something to both of us had been removed. It was as if someone had already decided to erase him from the space we built together. Then I saw my parents. They were inside the house, standing as if they had been waiting for me. Their expressions were not what I expected from people who had just lost a son-in-law. There was no comfort, no warmth, only a strange seriousness that made my stomach tighten. I asked them what had happened, why things looked the way they did, why no one had told me anything clearly. Instead of answering, my mother spoke in a tone that felt sharp and final. She said I needed to stop thinking about the past and focus on what came next. I didn't understand what she meant. My mind was still stuck in the hospital, in Daniel's absence, in the shock of everything that had happened. But before I could ask more questions, she said something that made everything inside me go still. She said I was already a burden and that raising a child alone would only make things worse for everyone. My father stood nearby, silent, not stopping her, not correcting her. That silence hurt more than anything else she could have said. I tried to process everything at once. The loss of Daniel, the confusion at the hospital, the strange emptiness in my home, and now the cold distance from my own family. I held Noah closer to my chest, feeling his small breath against me, as if he was the only thing anchoring me to reality. But even that comfort was fragile, because the next moments would change everything again in a way I could never have prepared for. The days after that moment felt like I had been pushed into a completely different life, without warning or preparation. I no longer had a home that felt like mine, no husband to come back to, and no family I could rely on. My parents did not stay with me. They did not help me adjust or support me through the early days of motherhood. Instead, they distanced themselves further, as if my situation had nothing to do with them anymore. I was left holding my newborn son, Noah, with nothing but uncertainty ahead of me, and no clear direction to follow. The first place I stayed was a small shelter for women and children. It was not comfortable, but it was safe enough to survive. I remember walking in with Noah in my arms, feeling the weight of exhaustion in every step. The staff there were kind, but kindness does not erase pain. Every night, I lay awake listening to other babies crying, wondering how my life had reached this point so quickly. Just a few days ago, I had a husband, a future, and a sense of security. Now I had none of it. I kept replaying the accident in my mind, trying to understand what I could have done differently, even though I knew deep down that it wasn't my fault. Money became the first real problem. I had none. Daniel had handled most of our finances, and whatever we shared was gone or inaccessible. I tried contacting my parents again, hoping that maybe after time had passed, they would reconsider their decision to abandon me. But every attempt ended the same way. Sometimes they didn't answer. Other times I was told directly not to call again. Their rejection wasn't emotional anymore. It had become routine, like I was a stranger they were trying to forget. I started looking for work as soon as I physically recovered enough. It wasn't easy with a newborn, but I had no choice. I took whatever jobs I could find, cleaning offices early in the morning, helping in small kitchens during the day, and doing delivery work at night when I had someone to watch Noah for a short time. Every day felt like a cycle of exhaustion that never ended. My body was always tired, my mind always stressed, and my heart constantly carrying the weight of grief. But every time I felt like giving up, I would look at Noah and remind myself that he had already lost his father. I couldn't let him lose his mother too. There were moments when I questioned everything. I would sit alone at night after work, holding Noah while he slept, and wonder how life had shifted so drastically. I wasn't just grieving Daniel. I was grieving the version of myself that existed before everything fell apart. I missed the life where I could plan for the future instead of just surviving the present. But survival became my only focus. I stopped expecting help. I stopped expecting fairness. I stopped expecting anything from the people who were supposed to care about me. As Noah grew older, he began to notice things. He would see me leave early in the morning and return late at night, exhausted and quiet. He would sometimes ask why we didn't live in a proper home like other families. I never had a simple answer for him. I didn't want to tell him the full truth too early. But I also didn't want to lie. So I would tell him that life had been difficult, but we were building something better together, step by step. He seemed to accept that, but I could see curiosity growing in his eyes as he got older. Despite everything, I made sure Noah never felt unloved. Even when I had nothing, I gave him my time, my attention, and whatever emotional strength I could gather. I wanted him to feel secure in a world that had not been kind to me. But there were nights when I would cry silently after he fell asleep, questioning whether I was truly giving him enough. I worried constantly that my struggles would shape his future in ways I could not control. Years passed like this. Slowly, I managed to build a slightly more stable routine. I moved out of the shelter into a small rented room, still modest, but better than before. I saved whatever money I could, carefully planning every expense. I learned to live with less and expect even less. My life became predictable in its difficulty. Wake up early, work multiple jobs, return home exhausted, take care of Noah, sleep for a few hours, and repeat. Then something unexpected happened that disrupted the fragile balance I had created. One evening, after returning from work, I found a letter waiting for me at the small apartment I was renting. It was official, stamped, and clearly legal in nature. At first, I thought it might be something related to old hospital records or financial paperwork connected to Daniel. But as I read the first lines, I felt my entire body freeze. The letter mentioned my parents. It stated that they were being investigated for financial irregularities connected to Daniel's business accounts. At first, I couldn't believe what I was reading. My mind struggled to connect the idea of my parents with anything illegal, especially anything related to Daniel. But as I continued reading, more details emerged. There were references to transfers, documents, and decisions made after Daniel's death. The investigation was serious and it required immediate attention. I sat down, holding the letter tightly, trying to process what it meant. For years, I had believed that my parents simply abandoned me out of cruelty or indifference. I had convinced myself that they were cold, selfish, and unwilling to help me during my lowest moment. But this letter suggested something far more complicated, something I had never considered before. It suggested that their actions might not have been random or emotional, but connected to something much larger involving Daniel's financial world. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept reading the letter over and over again, trying to find clarity in the words. My past, which I thought was closed and settled, suddenly felt like it was opening again. Questions I had buried started resurfacing. Why had they truly left me? Why had they taken control of Daniel's belongings so quickly? Why had they been so determined to cut me off completely? For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just confusion anymore, it was suspicion. And once that suspicion took root, it began changing the way I saw everything that had happened since that night in the hospital, quietly leading me toward answers I had never expected to find. The letter I received marked the beginning of a completely new phase of my life, one I never expected to enter. For years, I had believed my pain came from abandonment alone, from the cold decision of my parents to leave me when I needed them the most. But now, that belief started to shift into something heavier, something more complicated. The investigation mentioned in the letter was not random. It was connected to Daniel's financial history, his business accounts, and transactions that had taken place around the time of his death. At first, I refused to believe any of it. My mind tried to protect me by dismissing it as a misunderstanding or a false accusation. But the more I read, the more I realized this was not just paperwork. This was a door opening to something I had been kept away from for years. I contacted the number listed in the letter, and that is how I met Adrian, a lawyer assigned to the case. He was calm, precise, and careful with his words, as if he already understood how fragile my situation was. When I told him my story, he listened without interrupting, only asking for details when necessary. After I finished speaking, he remained silent for a moment before saying that there were inconsistencies in Daniel's financial records that needed deeper investigation. He did not accuse anyone directly, but the tone of his voice made it clear that something was wrong with the official version of events. As days passed, I began working closely with Adrian. We reviewed documents, bank statements, and archived records tied to Daniel's business. The more we uncovered, the more uncomfortable the truth became. There were financial transfers that I had never known about, signatures that looked altered, and decisions made after Daniel's death that should not have been possible without proper authorization. Each piece of evidence felt like a fragment of a puzzle I never knew existed. And slowly, those fragments started pointing in a direction I never wanted to consider toward my own parents. At first, I rejected the idea completely. It felt impossible. My parents had abandoned me emotionally, yes, but the thought that they could be involved in something connected to Daniel's death or his business dealings felt too extreme to accept. But Adrian did not push conclusions on me. He only showed me the facts and allowed me to see the pattern forming on its own. Every time I tried to disconnect them from it, another document would appear, linking them indirectly to decisions made during that period. The deeper we went, the clearer it became that Daniel's death was officially recorded as an accident. But certain financial movements raised questions that had never been properly investigated. Large sums had been shifted between accounts shortly after the accident. Ownership of assets had changed hands faster than legally expected. And most importantly, some of the authorization marks on key documents did not match Daniel's verified signatures. These were not small mistakes. They were signs of deliberate manipulation. One evening, Adrian called me into his office and placed a folder in front of me. Inside were documents that connected my parents to financial access rights that I had never known they possessed. I remember staring at those papers, my hands shaking slightly as I tried to understand how they could have gained access to anything related to Daniel's business. Adrian explained carefully that in certain emergency circumstances, temporary control or influence could be granted, but only under strict conditions. What he was suggesting was that those conditions may have been used in ways that were not fully legal or transparent. That night, I could not return home and feel the same way again. Every memory of my parents began to shift in my mind. Their cold behavior after Daniel's death, their refusal to support me, their insistence that I move on and disappear from their lives, it all started to feel less like emotional rejection and more like intentional separation. As if they had not only abandoned me, but actively removed me from something I was meant to see. The emotional weight of this realization was unbearable at times. I would sit alone, going through the documents again and again, trying to find a version of events that made them innocent. But the evidence did not change. It only grew stronger. Adrian advised me to remain patient and allow the investigation to continue properly, but patience was difficult when my entire understanding of my past was collapsing. During this time, Noah noticed the change in me. He would ask why I was always reading papers or looking stressed. I tried to shield him from it, telling him it was just work-related matters. But inside, I was fighting a storm of emotions that I could not easily explain to anyone, let alone a child. The idea that my parents could have been involved in anything connected to Daniel felt like a betrayal that went beyond words. It was not just about money or legal documents. It was about trust, memory, and everything I thought I knew about my family. As the investigation progressed, Adrian uncovered more connections that suggested my parents had not only been aware of certain financial transitions, but may have also benefited from them indirectly. This did not yet prove criminal intent, but it created a strong pattern that demanded further legal examination. The case was slowly transforming from a simple financial inquiry into something far more serious, involving multiple layers of accountability and hidden decisions made in the aftermath of Daniel's death. I found myself caught between grief and disbelief. Grief for Daniel, whose death now felt even more complicated than I had ever imagined, and disbelief at the possibility that the people who gave me life might have played a role in deepening my suffering instead of helping me through it. Every day brought new information, but no sense of peace. Only more questions, each one heavier than the last, slowly pulling me toward a confrontation with truths I had avoided for years. The courtroom felt colder than I had imagined. It was not just the air inside, but the weight of everything that had led me there. Years of pain, confusion, survival, and discovery had all narrowed into this single moment. I sat quietly on one side, holding on to every bit of strength I had left, while across from me sat my parents. They looked older now, but still carried the same expressions I remembered from the day they abandoned me, controlled, distant, and unreadable. Yet something was different this time. There was tension in their posture, a sense that they knew the ground beneath them was no longer stable. Noah was not with me in the courtroom that day. I had decided to protect him from this part of my life until I fully understood how it would end. But I carried his presence with me in every breath I took. Everything I was doing was not just for myself anymore, but for him too, so he would never have to grow up with unanswered questions about his father, or the truth behind our broken family history. Adrian stood beside me as the proceedings began. He was calm as always, guiding the presentation of evidence with precision. The court reviewed financial records first. These were the same documents we had spent months uncovering: bank transfers, account shifts, and suspicious changes that had taken place shortly after Daniel's death. As each page was shown on the screen, I could feel the atmosphere in the room shift slightly. These were not just numbers, they were decisions that had shaped the destruction of my life. Then came the signatures. Expert analysis had confirmed inconsistencies between Daniel's verified handwriting and certain documents that had been processed after his death. The difference was subtle but undeniable. The courtroom grew quieter as the forensic expert explained how these discrepancies indicated manipulation rather than coincidence. I watched my parents closely at that moment. My mother avoided eye contact completely. My father tightened his jaw, staring straight ahead, as if refusing to accept what was being presented. More evidence followed. Witness statements from financial staff, timelines that showed rapid asset movement, and documentation linking authorized access during a period when such actions should not have been possible. Piece by piece, the case built itself into something undeniable. I was not just hearing about it anymore, I was reliving it through structured proof. The confusion I had carried for years was now being replaced by a painful clarity. When it was time for testimony, Adrian spoke on my behalf first, summarizing my journey from the night of the accident to the present day. He did not dramatize anything. He simply laid out the sequence of events, showing how abandonment, financial control, and emotional isolation had all overlapped in ways that demanded legal examination. The judge listened carefully, occasionally making notes, while the room remained completely still. Then came the moment I had both feared and prepared for. I was asked to speak. I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the room turn toward me. For a moment I could not speak, the weight of everything I had carried for years pressed against my chest. But then I looked at my parents. Not with anger, not with desperation, but with a kind of exhausted clarity that only comes after surviving too much. I told the court about that night in labor, about Daniel's death, about waking up alone in the hospital, and about returning to a home that no longer felt like mine. I spoke about being told I was a burden, about being abandoned with a newborn child, and about the years I spent rebuilding my life from nothing. My voice did not shake as much as I expected. Instead, it felt steady, as if I had already lived through the worst part long ago. As I continued, I spoke about the investigation, about the documents, and about how the truth had slowly unfolded. I did not accuse emotionally. I simply described what had been uncovered. The courtroom did not react loudly, but there was a visible shift in energy. People were listening differently now, not just as observers of a legal case, but as witnesses to something deeply personal and painful. When I finished speaking, silence filled the room. My mother finally looked at me, but there was no warmth in her expression. There was something else, something closer to fear mixed with regret. My father remained rigid, but his silence no longer felt powerful. It felt uncertain, like a wall that had begun to crack. After closing arguments, the judge reviewed everything presented. The decision was not immediate in every detail, but the major findings were clear. Financial misconduct had occurred. Irregular control over Daniel's assets had been proven. Legal consequences were issued, including freezing of accounts and formal charges related to financial manipulation and unauthorized actions connected to the estate. The courtroom absorbed the judgment in a heavy silence. But none of that felt like the most important moment. The most important moment came when I stood up to leave. My parents were not escorted out yet. They were still sitting there, facing forward, no longer speaking. As I walked past them, my steps slowed slightly. For years, I had imagined this moment in different ways. Anger, confrontation, tears. But when it finally happened, I felt none of those things strongly enough to act on them. Instead, I felt distance, a final separation that could not be reversed by words anymore. My mother whispered something as I passed, but I did not stop to hear it fully. My father remained silent. And I kept walking. Outside the courtroom, the air felt different, almost lighter. Adrian followed beside me, but I needed a moment alone. I stood still for a while, looking at the sky, thinking about everything that had led me there. The loss, the abandonment, the struggle, and the truth that had finally surfaced after years of silence. For the first time in a long time, I was not searching for answers anymore. I was no longer trapped in confusion or waiting for explanations. Everything that had been hidden had been revealed in one form or another. And what remained now was not uncertainty, but a quiet understanding of everything that had happened and everything that could no longer be changed. And that is where my story takes its final turn. If you have followed every chapter, you already know this was never just about loss or abandonment. It was about truth slowly rising after years of silence, and a life rebuilt from the darkest moments imaginable. Before you leave, tell me in the comments which country you are watching this from, because it truly means a lot to know how far the story has reached. If this story moved you even a little, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional documentary stories like this one. Because sometimes the deepest pain doesn't destroy you, it reveals who you were meant to become.